Here's an interview I did with Dr. Jonas Schöne, a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Stanford, who for many years has been studying the negative and positive effects of not only AI, but social media as a whole on society, people, individuals, among others. So, hopefully you enjoy the video, and yeah, just give it a watch. I learned a lot from this one.
Let everyone in my house know that I'm recording, so.
Sure, do that.
Okay, so I'm going to put do not disturb on. All right. So, how are you?
I'm doing well. It's wonderful weather in California as per usual. And should I just quickly say who I am and what I do?
Yeah, I mean, if you want.
Sounds good. My name is Jonas Schöne. I'm a postdoc in the Department for Human-Centered AI at Stanford University. I studied the influence of modern technology on people's well-being and the influence that modern technology can have on the political landscape. And previously, I worked a lot on social media work, so how people use social media to express and share their feelings. But now that there's new emergent technology, specifically the large language models, we now also need to understand what the influence of large language models are and how this can be used for the better and for the worse of people.
All right, man. How long have you been doing that for?
So I just finished my Ph.D. At the University of Oxford and with Harvard Business School, and I studied the spread of negativity on social media. And I've been doing this now for the last 4 years. It started out from specifically me being interested in collective emotions, so how groups express and share their feelings. And social media in the beginning was more of a vehicle, of a place where you can see how people naturally express and share their feelings. And from the first studies where I just got interested into social media, it's just become very evident on what a big influence it can take, specifically on politics and people's well-being. So I kind of went with it and was focusing on that specific field for the last 4 years.
So I should call you Dr. Schöne.
Yeah, but you don't have to.
I insist. So, doctor, what's it called? Yeah, so have you ever directly worked with any of these social media companies or?
So we haven't had the opportunity to directly collaborate with the social media platform because they, A, on one side do their own research, and B, they're very protective of the data. And there has been incidences in the past where they have done research and was a larger backlash of doing experimental work with actual people and specifically the ethical implications of that. But there are ways to work with companies, and specifically in the past, before Elon Musk took over Twitter, that enabled us to work with social media data that was only with the public data, not any kind of data that is kind of secretive. It's only people who said that they're okay with sharing their data with researchers. This kind of public data we were able to analyze, and also of the ones of public figures. And obviously you need to submit an application to Twitter to ask them, can we use this data for the purpose of research? And usually they, in the past, were very willing to give this data. That now has unfortunately changed after Elon Musk took over. And it's a little bit in the air right now if you can still use Twitter data. But in the past, you could also use Reddit data, and very much in the past, you could also use some of the Facebook data. But some platforms are more protective than others.
All right, so you get a lot of your data. How does that work? How is the data process work of extracting that data? Do you get permission? Do they send it to you? Do you how does that work?
That's a very interesting question, and it used to be a very exciting way for young researchers to get into psychology, and specifically in a computational field. In the past, you would get an access key to. Essentially, it's a better version of the search function. Just on the example of Twitter, the search function of Twitter. You can just say, I'm interested in hashtags about, for example, Black Lives Matter. in the time period of February till August, and then you can send this not like via like a user interface. This is all code based, so you need to like program in Python, for example, or you can also use R, and you like write code that asks the database for text content and the information that comes along with text, like when was it created, who created it, how many people liked it, and this request that you send via your access key then gets to the database, and they send you back all the information that you ask for. If it is public, there's some information that isn't, or sometimes people delete their Twitter account, and then the data is also not possible for us to retrieve. And from then you have like all the text information and all the information about this tweet, and then you can decide on whether or not you want to use like automated tools to analyze the content of text, which you could also do, which is a little bit of a more complicated topic. Or you just like look into engagement. There's all kinds of things you can do with this kind of data.
Right. So a lot of that process, just really comes down to, having more access, more or less. That's from the company, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. So do you guys don't still do that, or do you? Or...
Now it's not possible anymore because you need to buy. It's a little in the air, so we're not entirely sure what the situation is in the moment. Up until last year, you were able to like collect data from Twitter with their allowance. The same with Reddit. They also changed their terms and conditions and the access to the API. API is usually like the access to like a companies and the data using code. Yeah, so I forgot the point that I was making. Can you remind me on where we were just going?
I was just asking, like, how does it, you get that data from companies, and if it was still possible.
Yeah, in the moment it's a little bit more difficult, but there's always ways, and there's old data that you can use, and there's unofficial ways where it's like the legal situation is a little bit unclear. Like when you see a website, it's made like of the HTML code, and technically you could use code that reads off the HTML, like the content of the website, but it depends on the terms and conditions of a certain website if you're allowed to collect this data. But usually you can also like reach out to a company and ask for specific permissions. But back in the day when you were a student, for example, and you want to write your thesis or like whatever project about social media, you could have just written a simple request. You've gotten your key and like you can do your own project, which is a very neat way to get started in research.
Right. So now let me ask you this. So social media tends to get a bad rap for being regarded as almost like the synthesis of all human mental illness, right? That's how some people treat it. So, how can AI be used to maybe prevent mental illness in your experience?
I think before diving specifically into AI, it's also important to like just set the stage on what social media does to people. Because in the beginning, it was very much seen as a black and white situation for social media users. It's either good or bad. A lot of research was focused on like, does social media increase your likelihood to feel worse or to develop mental illnesses or like any other sort of complications? And it's the research found it's actually not that easy. It really comes down to how you use the technology. And this is something that should be the red line of this entire conversation that we're having, is always about like how do you use this. And this is why our research is so important, that we get an understanding of when does it hurt us and how does it help us. There's people who use social media and felt much better afterwards. Like if you use social media to actually be social, which was the core ingredient of like what social media was meant to be, and like you use this to connect to friends, to actually like get to meet them and do stuff, is good for your well-being. Like if you use social media in an active way, there's a lot of benefits that you can gain from it. And specifically during like COVID, it was like the only way how you could actually be in touch with people, and the people who used it in this active fashion to like seek social support and stay in touch with friends, they actually showed some emotional improvement during that time. While people who use it very passively and just like, especially when social comparison come into place, these are the people who can actually like get a lot of the damage from it. Like if you only see like, oh, my friends are having a great time and why am I not included? And it's like, or you go on Instagram and see all the richness of other people's, and you're like, why is my life not like this? They're constantly on vacations. Like these are the ways you use social media, and the way you approach social media will define the way it will define the emotional consequence and also your well-being consequence. And AI generally speaking is a very large term. And you could like think of this in like this. I think if people think about AI, they think about like machine learning and like classifiers, or like now ChatGPT is like an intelligent like other being, let's say, or like another agent that you can talk to and can respond to you in a smart way. But AI is also algorithms at the same time. Like algorithms can hurt or can also improve the way we feel. And there's interesting work on this. And in the moment, the way social media algorithms and like their artificial intelligence behind this works is there's this reinforcement based on engagement. And we are very excited about things that are not good for us. And specifically, there's something called a negativity bias, that you would pay more attention or something comes more into your own mind if it's negative compared to positive. So you scroll down your feed and you see like a natural disaster or someone who's like upset about politics. And even though most of the content on social media is surprisingly positive, between 60 and 80% in some networks, these 20% of like negative content, they will really grab your attention. And then you start looking at these negative content and maybe even leave a like or like retweet it or text something under it. And then this is going to be picked up by the algorithm. And they now think, oh, this kind of content is what this person wants to see. And obviously the platform wants you to stay on the site, obviously. So they have an incentive to keep you there. So they will give you more stuff that you have looked at before and engaged with. So there's this functional disalignment of interests that you now start to see all these negative things that are attention grabbing and they keep you engaged, but they might at the end of the day are not particularly good for you. And here at Stanford specifically, there's this initiative to build value-based algorithms that don't maximize on engagement. They maximize on other values. For example, is this particular piece of content going to be insightful, or does it strengthen pro-democratic values? For example, if you can see two sorts of political contents. One is like, oh, I hate politics, I don't like my senator, etc., etc. And there's contents like, oh, go vote. It's like you might not like the current situation, but there's things you can do that are within reasons. Like you can also promote this kind of content, and it keeps people equally, maybe even more engaged. But the social media companies have not yet implemented or even considered this to the extent that they potentially should have. And this is something that the field is moving towards now.
So going off of that, people in general have, as you said, a bias towards negativity, but there's also a level of conformity where, you see something being posted and really popular, and then a lot of times people feel the need to like it as well, right? That's just the way people are. But let me ask you this now. A lot of what is posted on social media is to some extent faked, right? Where, for example, you could see some guy riding in a jet that's not his, or, driving in a Bentley that's not theirs, right? Just stuff like that. How much would that play into mental health? Because I was also talking to my psychology teacher, because I go to high school, about why social media is so unhealthy. And he kind of said to the effect of comparison's the thief of joy, right? Where if a lot of it's people just posting the best of their lives, right? And, a lot of people unfortunately feel really down about that. It's like this person's going to a party, this person's going here. So how much would that play into, mental health issues on social media?
That's a really great point, and that's the point of social comparison and amplification of content. And in this overestimation of other people's exciting lives, there's two things that play into why this is particularly bad for us. Like, one is just from the purely design standpoint of social media. If you go on Instagram and scroll, it's a feed. Like, you see images upon content. Like, there's just a whole array of stuff that you see, and you will not pay attention to everything, and B, you can't remember all of this. So you will your cognitive engagement will stick on things that are salient or like specifically outstanding. And on top of that, a lot of stuff is faked, which is a whole issue in itself. Your mental representation is specifically focused on these extreme examples because you're not remembering if your friend had a mediocre lunch, posted a picture of a sad sandwich. Like, you're not going to remember that, but you will remember all the interesting and exciting foods that you have seen. And if you then think, what is the average food that you have seen, and what is what is representative for people's food, then you don't remember the sad sandwiches anymore. Then it's just like the average is like something mildly exciting, and it's not representative of how the world is. So we have this one perceptual issue of how our memory and attention works, and then we have all the faked and extreme content. Like, it doesn't even have to be fake. Like, sometimes you have, let's say, 250 friends, and one of them is going to do something exciting, and this is the stuff that they will post, and this is just a very slim part of their entire life, but it's going to be aggregated on social media and will shape your perception of what is normative. So there's a bunch of mechanisms working against you at the same time. And it's really hard to, even if you're very aware of this, like me as a social media researcher, I sometimes go on Twitter and see all my colleagues posting exciting work. And then I'm sitting there, oh, is my work that exciting? Like, you see the stuff that is retweeted, it's like thousands of people have been excited about this and that work. And you're like, maybe my work isn't that great. And you start spiraling in this kind of even if you know that this is the way social media works, it still makes an effect on you. And I think it will also come down to education. It's helpful, obviously, for us to have this conversation, or you talking to your psych teacher and have this conversation. But there also needs to be a larger scale on maybe on the social media websites that need to help to bring things into perspective, to help people not feel as bad as they sometimes do.
Right. So in a way, not in a way, social media does provide people with a fake sense of reality, because the averages, this is what I'm getting out of what you're saying, the averages of what people are seeing are, generally speaking, because you don't remember every post, but generally speaking, if you were to break down the average of every post, it would be this person's eating the most exciting food I've ever seen, and this person, is eating another food that's really good, just as an example. And you keep seeing that, and then in your mind, that's the average. And then, what actually is the average gets extraordinarily lowered by, your actual perception of reality, because your reality for most people doesn't really always, go to that extent all the time.
Yes, exactly. There's a bias in what people put up. They obviously put up stuff that is more exciting than their average. And B, you will only remember the things that are on top of the things that are already posted a little bit more exciting than the average, because you can't remember all 250 dishes you've seen on social media. So you will only remember the outstanding ones. And of both of these two biases, you will then have an issue of computing a representative average of how the world actually looks like.
So now, from that, right, from the fact that, most of it's fake, from your research and Johan's research, that I've read, a lot of what your work is with regard to data sets. So if the information is fake to some extent, how accurate can the data set for the behavior really be?
That's a very good point. And if you do this kind of research, you need to strike a balance between using data sets that are on social media and data sets that you prepare yourself. So there's experimental studies in which you can carefully pick of what you are going to show people. And then you have the real world. This is how social media looks to people. And there's interesting things to learn from observing the reality, and also interesting things to learn of how the mechanism and the details of what people see will make them feel. Because, like, for example, this aggregation issue that I told you about, that there's like, oh, if you see an array of different stimuli, you will only remember the more intense ones, which then leads you to an overestimation of averages. This is something we wouldn't have found out about if we would have just had the social media data sets. You need to go into the lab and test this experimentally. And that is the exciting aspect of the computational social sciences, that you combine the computational aspects and also the traditional social social sciences methods on trying to answer questions.
Right. So moving away from this, I was reading a lot of Johan's work and some of yours, and one of the words that came up was subjective well-being.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly is that? Does it even maybe does it tie into what we were just talking about?
Subjective well-being is a very interesting point, and it ties into a lot of our conversations. Subjective well-being is comprised of multiple facets. There's the existence and the experience of positive emotions in the absence of negative emotions, as well as a more cognitively, more rational, what is your life satisfaction? That's like the three pillars of how you can view well-being. And social media can pull on all of these three strings, right? So if you only see negative content on social media, it will obviously affect how you feel. Like if you see a lot of negativity, you will feel negative as well. That's called emotion contagion. You catch someone else's emotion by its mere exposure. And obviously you start thinking about the negative content. If you only see like climate change content, you think like the world is ending, which it sort of is. And it's obviously like if you only think about this during your day, it's just going to drop your well-being. There's also the effect, like the effect of positivity. Like if you don't experience enough positivity, that's bad for your well-being. And the life satisfaction aspect is exactly what we had about, like, what is representative. If you judge your life in comparison to others, your life satisfaction will be reduced. But as dooming as this seems, there's ways to, like, how social media can reduce these, but there's also ways in which the same features of social media can be used to improve all of these statements. And as much as, for example, my doctor's thesis was called The Spread of Negative Emotions and Its Consequences on Social Media, kind of what my bottom line is, what I actually also wanted to say really is there's ways in which social media is an actual positive tool that can make your life better. And it's important to understand how it like decreases your happiness, but it's also important to see that there's a lot of ways in which it helps.
I think part of what is scary about social media is to some extent that it's kind of an echo chamber, but also a mirror, right, of the way that you are in the world. Because when you think about the algorithm is geared towards what you want to see and what you keep liking, right? So a lot of people, when you look internally and you introspect what a person would want to see, obviously they would say something like, oh, I want to see puppies all the time or something, right? But a lot, that would be the very nice answer of I want to see beaches all the time. I want to see my friends. But unfortunately, people have a very innate sense to, maybe look at more morbid things, the news, which in and of itself is a whole different subject, which is mostly negative. Do you think that that's part of what's so depressing or potentially driving towards mental illness about social media?
There's multiple things that needs and can be said about this. Echo chambers, generally speaking, have been one of the points that a lot of people have pointed out. So echo chambers, that you surround yourself with people that are like-minded, but sometimes even, that's what recent work showed, you surround yourself with people who are even a little bit more intense than you are. Like, let's say that you are mildly liberal, you would surround yourself with people who are moderately liberal. And the moderately liberals would surround themselves also with people who are intensely liberal. So there's also this drive towards intensity. The overall, like, the influence of echo chambers has been a little bit debated on like how much this is like the active ingredient to why social media can be bad. But I think, just to like quickly summarizes, there's still a lot of reasons to believe that is one of the points that can make social media a bad place. But there's one thing that needs to be said about negativity in general. And it is important to acknowledge that while it's nice and desirable to want to see puppies, there's a very functional reason that you need to see negativity sometimes. The same reason why negativity bias existed in the first place. Like, if you like, back in the day, you're one of the people who are hunters and gatherers, and you like see some of your prey, and you're like, oh, that's a positive stimuli, and you don't notice all like the threats along the way, like the bear that is like right next to you, it's going to not be like evolutionary like helpful to you, like, because you're going to die. You need to see some of the negative stimuli. The same is still true on social media. If you don't have like these viral negative phenomena on social media, for example, the Me Too content, that was all not pleasant, but it's very necessary that people were aware of that. The same with Black Lives Matter. That's not like content that is like puppies and happiness. It's like like, especially like the video of George Floyd, is like intense negative emotions for most people, and it needed to be spread. Otherwise, nothing will change. So negativity is a driver of change, and that's something that needs to be considered. Even in the context of echo chambers, if you want people to like go vote, a little bit of negativity really helps. That's called negative campaigning. So yeah, that's also like an aspect of negativity that needs to be considered.
Right. So now, going off of this too, if you were to really analyze, a data set, how much content would that look like you need? Is it a matter of time? Would a data set be more helpful if a person has 10 years worth of social media content? Or is it the amount of content? How accurate, could you still make an accurate assessment off of somebody's well-being from a dozen posts? How important is the amount and the time of content?
With the, I think that the question needs to be like split into like, if you want to like develop an algorithm, like one of Johannes's papers tries to show that you can demonstrate, like you can predict depression in an area based on the social media posts. What it shows is that you obviously, the more data you have, the better. That's just the bottom line. And from an individual perspective, like, you can do this, like, this is the one point. You can train something on like a county level to predict like depressive symptoms, but on an individual level, to predict, like, even for like a clinically trained person to predict someone's depression is not always easy, and there's a lot of misdiagnosis even if you sit there with a person. So just going off of social media, I find is a little critical, and I'm not sure if you should like think about this in that way, that you just like look at 10 tweets of someone, analyze their content and say, oh yeah, this person is probably depressed. There's some sort of, it's an indicator, but text data can be extremely noisy for all the reasons that you've also mentioned before. Like there's echo chambers, there's social desirability. Some people might not want to express themselves in the way that they actually feel. The exciting thing is that above and beyond all this noise, you can still predict depression on a county level, but on an individual level, I would still go for the traditional route of clinical assessments to really make that point.
Right. So, with regards to text data now and how the analysis works, in one of Eichstadt's, I believe I'm pronouncing that right, one of his interviews for Stanford News on April 27th, 2020, he spoke about how the usage of certain words like taxes and homework were used by people typically with higher education, and higher income. And on the flip side, the words such as lol, LOL, good, and love tended to be used by people with lower income and lower education. How would that work in a data set? Is that just a note, an observation, or?
It depends on what you mean. Like, how does this work? Like from an analysis perspective, or like how you can get to a conclusion like that?
Both.
So like one way of doing this is like, imagine you send out a survey of like general demographics to a bunch of Twitter users. And you also ask them to give, like they give you their Twitter handle so you can analyze their data. So you now have like on one hand, all the demographic data. You then have a whole load of like text information. And then you can try to connect them. Over time, you can also try to connect them just generally speaking. And analysis of text is very complex because language is extremely complex. But you can still then at the end of the day predict like using there's a lot of natural language processing for everyone who's interested. That's the term for that, NLP. There's multiple ways on how you can like break down language in like analyzable chunks, and then you can correlate how is the likelihood of using certain linguistic features associated with their corresponding socioeconomical backgrounds, their age. And there are certain patterns. Obviously, like if you, for example, if you go to university, you will talk more about homework and assignments. That's just like, because that's how your life looks. So like your language is also shaped by obviously your life circumstances and what you do. And at the end of the day, you just correlate the features of your language with you as a person. And in the best case scenario, you can have like individuals, like actual, like you can match them one-to-one. You have like a person's information and you also have their texts. But sometimes you can't get to a person's like personal information. You can also go off county levels. Like there's information about the average political affiliation of a county. And then you have tweets in the same county. And you do the same thing. You try to analyze the linguistic features and correlate them with whatever feature happens in that county. And then you can make this correlational association between the use of language and a certain other features. That doesn't make it causal, obviously. You're not instantly educated just because you write suddenly about homework, but it's just a feature that you can find online.
Right. So once again, it's a sort of mirror, between what the person's doing in their life versus, what language they use, So if I'm understanding this correctly, if, a person's of higher education, they're more likely to talk about homework. They're more likely to talk about, I don't know, taxes, for example, or paperwork or something like that. Whereas somebody who, on the flip side, may not have those things, just simply wouldn't talk about those subjects. And
it's an interesting way to put it, to say it's a mirror of your life. It's also a very polished mirror of your life for most people, because there's also something called impression management, and that gets more relevant the bigger you are as a person in terms of like the followers, your social status. Like you can't post everything you actually. There's still people who do that, obviously, but there's repercussions in expressing yourself in a certain way. So it's only the things that you deem to be reciprocated or like to strike a chord with your audience. That's the stuff that you will usually post, specifically if you're a larger user. That's again also pins into like the idea of the echo chambers. You know your audience, and you wouldn't say something unless you like violence and like to be antagonized. You wouldn't say something that you know that people would hate, even if that's the way you actually feel. So you're not getting to all of the entire mirror of your personality.
So now, this is a little bit off topic, but also kind of not. It's, have you heard of Mr. Beast?
Yeah.
So now let me ask you this. He's the total opposite of the negativity bias. He posts some of the best content, in terms of positivity, like in terms of, he's extremely positive. It's always like giving a homeless person a house, or, giving my mom a Lamborghini or something like that, right? It's just like examples. Or, if this person does this, they win $100,000. So that's kind of in a way the total opposite of what people think would get views on social media, because not only is he giving people a chance, like, oh, maybe that could be me, giving people like, oh, wow, this person's doing something good, but it also goes against the negativity bias. It goes against both comparison and the negativity bias. So how is someone like him the most popular YouTuber of all time, yet he seems to kind of go against both?
That is a very interesting observation. And I feel like there's not a lot of discussion about this in the field for all the reasons that you just mentioned. Like there's a lot of literature saying, oh, negativity is the stuff that drives people. But yeah, they're like these outrageous positive like videos. They get a lot of views. And people, for multiple reasons, that is true. Like it's not... Like if you, in one of our last publications, we showed that an increase in positivity is also increasing your numbers of retweets. But for negativity, for most people, negativity spreads a little easier. So it's also, you also need to think about what, like, create something that is positive for most people. Like if you show someone even videos of puppies, like half of the people, oh, I don't like dogs. And it's like, positivity is really hard to achieve. Like positivity is a state in which everyone is satisfied, and satisfying a lot of people is super difficult. And obviously also something that makes Mr. Beast's content interesting to people, there's still in positivity, there's also a lot of controversy. Like if you think about, oh, there's people who film themselves doing charitable things, while positivity and being charitable shouldn't be something that is displayed outward as much as it is. So he's also getting a smaller crowd that dislikes it, but I don't think that's the main driver. But wholesomeness, definitely people like to see that as well. I mean, in the early times of the internet, people were more captivated by like the funny cat videos, and positivity still drives, but it's just harder to achieve positivity. And there's not a lot of people who can pull positive events that are in the size of Mr. Beast. That makes them so outstanding, and outstanding is always good on social media.
Right. It's just super interesting because he does basically everything that theoretically on paper should do the total opposite. Not saying these videos aren't good or they're not exciting for one reason or another. I'm just saying that, a lot of YouTubers tend to either, or, just social media people, sometimes they'll even fake drama. They'll fake certain things, or they'll post something really, really outrageous, to get them on the news. Well, not even clickbait, just like really garbage, like, crappy stuff. Like, for example, there's a YouTuber by the name of Fusi who, I believe he suffers from bipolar disorder, and recently he's been blowing up on social media because he's been having like a manic episode on a live stream. Now, I don't know the full situation. I'm not going to comment too much on it, but someone like him is the total opposite of Mr. Beast, where he's actively being disruptive and, having this episode and everyone's kind of cheering him on, which makes it go even further. And then you get a guy like Mr. Beast who's doing something extraordinarily good, debatably speaking, for everybody. So, how would a parallel like that exist?
But if you think about it, like, positivity is just really hard to achieve. Like, it's easy to like instigate like a beef with another YouTuber and like do something negative. We will come up with a million things we could just do right off the bat. Like, but with positivity, just like not everyone just has like the possibility even to like take some money and give this to people, because it's such a unique and outstanding situation. It really captivates people, because we all would like to see how like someone's life suddenly changes for the better. It's like really interesting, but it just doesn't happen as much. Something that's like equally like positive that gets always a lot of like attention on social media is like, for example, when a soldier returns from like their service and meets their family, and suddenly like there's this overwhelming positivity. But if you think about this situation, it entails still negativity that is suddenly resolved. Like, you have a father missing from the family, you have a homeless person that gets money. There's just something that is being overcome, and I think that might be the interesting aspect of it. Like, if you give a rich person more money, no one would watch that, I guess. So like, to achieve positivity is difficult, and overcoming negativity is like maybe one of the more solid ways of achieving that.
So in a way, it's kind of like man's nature to watch the battle of good and evil.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Like, you put this better than I did.
Thank you.
People love to, especially in the US, they love to see a good story of like the underdog just making it. It's like, there's ways in which, but even in the underdog stories, there is just something that was overcome. Like, even in the underdog story that ends up being a massively positive thing, there was a lot of like trauma and like things in the way that needs, like, no one watches a movie that is just like if you watch a drama or like a romance movie, like, they're not positive from start to finish. People would be bored to death halfway through. So there needs to be like somewhat of a kicker, I guess.
Well, I guess that is partly what, drives Mr. Beast fans, because, it's always someone in need that he's giving a house, or someone that's in a challenge, right? He gets like 20 people to put their hands on an airplane, and whoever wins gets the airplane. Like, that would be an example, or 100 people, all different ages, who stays in the longest gets the money, right? It's all a matter of, if this person overcomes the negativity a lot of times, then they get something good out of it. They get something really good, life-changing, even because they put up with it, right? That's not all he does, obviously. The majority of it too is also, just $1 boat versus $100 million boat. But I think I understand what you're saying of just people like to see people rise, like the American dream almost.
Yeah, it's very baked into. I'm not sure if this is like I'm not deeply ingrained in like the Eastern like cultures, how they think about like what is viral on their platforms. Like, I'm not sure if like this kind of rise to the top would be equally interesting for a different audience, but it certainly is for an American audience, like the American dream.
Well, that's actually a very interesting point that you bring up, because I didn't even realize to ask about this, but there's actually a lot of talk about how on TikTok, for example, if you compare a TikTok page of somebody from the United States to somebody in China, a lot of times, it'll be in the United States, somebody dancing to a song, an influencer, just doing something stupid like a prank in Walmart. Like, those are examples. But if you look at it in China, it'll be like a kid, at a science fair, or, doing STEM projects and such, which, that has, people have political theories about it that, like, you can imagine what it would be. So what would be your thoughts on something like that?
So I think there's always cultural values that drive certain interests. So there's just things that that are more promoted in one culture over another. But there's still like the overarching like humanly ingrained mechanisms, like the negativity bias you will certainly also find in other cultures, maybe to a different extent. But there's studies, at least in my field, where they look at like spread of content and like texts. You can also see this in Japanese text and also on Chinese websites, that negative content spreads further and faster than positive content. So that's like an overall like finding, because it's like this is like human nature. But there's on top of that, there's like a different layer of like culture, like what do people actually appreciate. Like there's this massive trend. I'm not sure if it's as big in the US, like these mukbangs where you like sit and watch someone eat while you also eat. It's like it's a very culturally developed difference. But I think it also came to the US, now that I think about it. But there might be for sure different interests that people have depending on where they're from.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that, you know, like I said, like you said, culturally it is a very big difference. I would have to agree with that for the most part. Because
And also think about what people think is funny. Like if you go on like, if you see posts on Reddit or 9gag 10 years ago, some of this just feels out of place, or you don't really get the context of it. And like this is just something that develops with each generation. If I now look at like the new like Gen Z kind of memes, I'm like, I don't get it, because I don't get the context. And like dancing, I've never understood why TikTok. I'm like from a Western. I'm from Germany. I'm from a Western culture. I don't get why people watch other people weirdly dance. But there might be like a context that I'm just not missing. That I'm just missing. And there's like you can't just bake everything down to like, oh, people work in this way, and obviously I can now predict that this piece of content is going to be viral. It's not that easy, unfortunately. Otherwise, people would do this all the time.
Right. So let me ask you this now. With regards to the actual information itself, and this circles back a little bit to our discussion before about the data sets that you have. And this is regarding geotagging. Let's just say a person's in Africa and they post their trip to Africa. Does your geotagging AI verify that they are indeed in Africa? If they lied about being in Africa, like on Instagram, you can change your location tag, and what could you draw from the falsehoods? Like what conclusions?
That's a good point. This is really difficult. Like there used to be actual like geotags that were linked to GPS, but sometimes people just put manually their location in. And there's like I had a few studies where we started looking into people's actual location based on where they say they're from. It's pretty messy. Like there's ways on, if you like really really want to find out where someone is from and like where they posted a picture from. For example, if you post a picture of like your surrounding, like based on how like the sun is coming in, and like, there's ways to triangulate your approximate position. But for most like research question that is not particularly, it's not of our interest to figure out what an individual is doing. But I wouldn't say that it's impossible for like, if you're like a private investigator and you look through people's contents, you will figure that out. But usually for our type of research, we're not doing this to that extent. For example, like also there's cities in the UK and in the US that have the exact same name. Like it's hard to tell where they're from. So we usually ask questions that don't depend on that.
So that's a bit more of a semantical issue of, maybe I'm not using the right word, but information, like just a word issue a lot of times of just people maybe white lying or just different circumstances, which makes it more difficult to gather that data.
Yeah, there's people who are actually lying. There's people who use the name, like if you're in Cambridge or in Oxford, that could either be in the US or in the UK. There's two of them. And there's like they use I'm very sure there used to be actual geotags that had your physical location on them, but in the moment they don't do that anymore, at least in the data sets that I was looking at. And you also need to like actually allow people to access because like it used to be public data and people don't usually share their public GPS data.
Right. So this got me thinking a bit about Snapchat and, comparatively the type of ways that people post on these different platforms. And just from like personal experience, when somebody posts something on Snapchat, it tends to be a little bit more edgy, but also personal, for lack of a better term. So, on Instagram, somebody would post something like, oh, I just got into this college, or, oh, I just adopted this dog, or, oh, I just did this, whatever, taking a picture with whoever. But on Snapchat, a lot of times it tends to be more, edgy content, for, again, lack of a better term, whether it be someone vaping in a bathroom or, something like that. Just, I think you can kind of think of what I'm talking about, but is it, what factors into that? Because, it's not like you can't screenshot it. Like, why would that happen?
Just think about who is seeing that. Like, you don't have your mom on Snapchat, I would assume, and you wouldn't send your mom just randomly vaping in your own restroom, and it gets you into trouble. It's like, read the audience again. That's kind of this. That seems to be also an overlying theme of our entire conversation. Is like, depending on who is the recipient of your content, you will tailor it to them. And WhatsApp and Snapchat, these are like very personalized, like this is your closest circle usually. That's the place where you can vent, where you can be your real self. But if you put yourself out there, like specifically, like think about like Facebook, if you still use it, there's your grandma, your aunt is there, maybe even your teacher is on there. So you really need to be careful and impression management on what you're putting out there. And on top of this, like making sure that you put yourself in, like you present yourself essentially. There's also cultural, like emotional and cultural norms for different platforms. Like Twitter is to like hate on politics and to be negative about certain things. Snapchat is for being edgy. WhatsApp is for being actually like informative and like tell your friends what's going on. And Facebook, I don't know what Facebook is for actually. Instagram is to flex, and LinkedIn is for flexing, but in a business setting. Like there's just like these different purposes that these different platforms have. If all platforms had the same purpose, we only would be on one, right? And so that also plays into the reason why you interact with certain platforms and content differently on separate platforms.
Right. So now this reminded me and also brings me into something that I realized I couldn't have possibly had this discussion without mentioning 4chan. And, yeah. So look, I think, as somebody who has researched social media, or even just as somebody who's been on the internet, that 4chan's obviously known for not being the nicest of places. I want to just say the basic answer of it's just because people are anonymous there, but what exactly, factors into 4chan being not debatably, it is, basically the worst, more or less, social media site, at least on the mainstream media.
It is interesting. Like I'm not particularly expert on 4chan specifically, but I've seen this because I'm like interested of multiple levels on how like this is collective actions. Like there's people coming together to either be great or terrible, and even on 4chan there has been instances in which 4chan actually did surprisingly helpful things. Like
I've seen
you can find really interesting documentaries on YouTube of like how this very specific group has done surprisingly well. But also, like, obviously they've done horrendous things. Obviously, we all know the stories. It's interesting to see that even a platform that is this questionable, let's say, or like this, at least, people have very difficult perspective on. Even in this situation, there is a possibility in which we can use this to make people better or worse. And now we need to understand why this is a platform where a lot of worse is happening. And it has obviously also to do with content moderation. Like Facebook and also Twitter has seen a rise of like moderation of content. You can't post everything. Even Reddit, that has claimed to be the front door of the internet, even they can't post anything anymore, or like everything anymore. And unfortunately, I think I'm not sure what their terms and conditions are, but more stuff flies there that wouldn't fly on other platforms. And I think the ability that more is allowed definitely plays into the consequence that more is going to happen if more is allowed, obviously. And that also attracts a certain crowd then. Like if you have a platform on which you can be in a certain way, and it's the only place where you can congregate with other people who are this way. And this again plays into, your audience now actually accepts this kind of behavior. And suddenly it's like facilitated, let's say. People who used to be slightly weird on Reddit before can't be slightly weird on Reddit anymore, and they need to go to Fortun. And suddenly you have like this selection bias of people who are a bit more intense than is accepted on different platforms. And anonymity, being anonymous, god damn it, definitely plays into that. But you also need to think about how people choose this platform specifically. And that plays into it as well. So you can imagine social media behavior to be some sort of a triangle. Like you have selection of people and their audience, then you have their expression, what they produce and what they share, and then you have the culture that develops out of this, and they all influence each other in a certain way. And unfortunately, there's just multiple factors that play into being more intense than is acceptable for most other platforms.
Well, what attracts a lot of people is, unfortunately, because I think the whole motto of when it first came out was there's no moderation, do whatever you want, right?
Is it that way still? Like I
haven't, nobody really goes on there anymore. It's not like a popular site, but you know, from my understanding, the concept is just more or less that you can post whatever you want as long as it's not illegal, right? So, you know, I think you can imagine what lengths people go to push that. So, you know, it's kind of like a Snapchat thing, once again, circling back, where because people are not only allowed but also encouraged by their peers to be more edgy, it kind of creates this, once again, an echo chamber where people just constantly be more and more edgy until they do something really, really like extreme.
There's also this slight tendency for people, this like morbid curiosity. In the beginning of the internet, I'm not sure if that's like was still a thing for you. There was like these websites where you can like see the most horrendous like work accidents and like WikiLeaks.
Live leak.
Yeah. Like that used to be a thing before the internet got more sanitized, if you think of it. And like people are really, because you won't see this from day to day, and you're still kind of curious, and you also never hear certain opinions from day to day, and you want to like see what is out there. And like Fortun is a place where you could hear stuff that you would never hear outside from a person on your day-to-day life. And people are just interested by that. It's just like the curiosity to discover things that might not even be good for you. Like there's people who are like got traumatized for life from the videos that they've seen on these websites. So, but it's still interesting. Not good for you, but interesting.
I think that's, you know, it's kind of the same reason people try cigarettes, you know, like they know it's bad for them, but it's kind of like that idea that, you know, they know it's not good for them, but, you know, let's just say they're with somebody that does it, might be kind of cool to them or something like that, even though they know they'll get cancer. to some extent, the validation is more important than a risk that's not immediately apparent to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's more, like, social media isn't the only place where people have a vague understanding of how things could be good or bad for them, and they're still not doing it. Like, even if I tell you, like, oh, eating broccoli and vegetables is really good for you, you're like, do you want that? There's multiple reasons for why you don't want to do that. And the same happens in social media. Doom scrolling and watching like extremely negative stuff is interesting. But I know I shouldn't do it, but I still sometimes do, because just in being like good for me is not the only thing that drives our lives, right?
Right. People have a greater drive than just what's in their best interest,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
exactly.
Well, not unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, if people would only do what is good for them, we had much less problems, but that's just not how it works.
It'd also be a much more boring society.
Yeah, and as I said, there is a point of being like seeing negativity. If it weren't there, and you're not aware of the climate crisis, you're not aware of Black Lives Matter or like anything else, like you're not a functional member of society. Like you need to have a certain level of negativity. It's about the dosage, and also like that you have a good understanding of negativity. And there's also, and you also need to be aware of the toxic positivity that you see, for example, on Instagram. Like if suddenly on Instagram you see someone actually like posting something that they're upset about or annoyed about, you're like, oh, that's a nice change in pace. It's like, it's part of it to see negativity, and it helps people bond.
Right. Yeah. Now, taking negativity to the extreme, right? The most extreme, I'll say. Let's say that one of the people that you're analyzing, right, in a data set, your AI shows that there's a 99% chance, and I don't know if your AI measures this, but it says that there's a 99% chance that they are suicidal, have suicidal ideation interests, maybe even a 99% chance that they're going to commit that act. What is the mechanism that can be put in place to prevent this? What are the mechanisms? How does that go about?
That's really difficult. Like for research projects, generally, even in the depression projects, you're not reaching out to participants or like people in the data set. It also has to do like with the IRBs and like the ethics clearance. You can't just like reach out to people. And even if you're like really sure, like there's a cost that comes like with doing that. Like there's a responsibility in doing this in the right way. And me as a computational social psychology, I'm a psychologist. I'm not clinically trained. I wouldn't be reaching out to anyone and make this rather big statement to confront someone with this information. It's also really unsettling that just imagine like, even if it were true, like suddenly you get this email that, oh, based on your Twitter activities, we now think you might be suicidal. So here are some links. It's like, it feels a little bit dystopian. So while it might be helpful, and I think there are some mechanism in place, I think specifically on Reddit, if you look for certain things, they would, I think, at least have disclaimers of where you can get help.
They refer you to the number.
Yeah, exactly. But for me, as someone who was a third party interacting with a platform's data, it would be a bit out of place. And we don't usually reach out to people, or we don't reach out to people generally.
So more or less, it's not really the researchers or even sometimes the company's place to say.
I'm not sure about the companies. Like they obviously know much more than we do, right? But it's also like a privacy issue. Just like imagine you like talk to a friend on your DMs, like, oh, I think about suicide, and imagine like suddenly you're the Facebook, like suddenly you get like a notification from the website. It's really a fine line of like overstepping boundaries, but at the same time, if you have like an automated something that doesn't feel like it's like it goes onto like your privacy, like as soon as you say, oh, I want to kill myself, or like something that's super specific, suicidal, that you at least say, oh, you use this word and that triggers this automatic mechanism. Like if you feel that way, there's some links, like the same way. But I'm also like, then again, I'm not an expert specifically on like the clinical aspects, but it's just like some of the thoughts that I had towards that. But there's definitely other people who could make a more like specific claim about this more clinical setting.
Right. So it's just a difficult situation to really work with, due to privacy concerns and, what if it's the wrong person? What if it's a false alarm sort of thing?
Yeah. So there's a lot, like it's really complicated. Like this is a very sensitive space for all the right reasons.
Right. No, I absolutely understand. So on a much lighter note, this is something one of my friends came up with as a question. And I kind of, it's a faulty question, but I'm going to ask it anyways.
Yeah, go ahead.
So my friend asked, will your AI short circuit or crash if someone were to say, I love doing good homework on taxes, LOL?
Oh, that's what you mean. That's a good question. It wouldn't crash, that's for sure. You would load on multiple, like you would load as well, like on homework, you had like a higher score because you used homework, and you would say LOL. So like one part of your prediction would say, oh, highly educated. The other part says it's not as much. So you would end up on like some sort of an average claim, but usually it's like not a good data point. Like you would be like someone that our algorithm doesn't like learn as much from. Like if it's if everyone who's like super educated would always say homework and never say LOL, like you would have a very clear pattern. But in real life, it's just like a very mixed signal. And for an individual level, it would be harder to tell who you are. And for the model, it's harder to learn. But it wouldn't crash anything. It just makes life harder. And language is like this. Like if you look at all your language features, you will have things that will say you're educated, and they will have things that will say you're not. So language is a very fuzzy space.
Right. So, it's just really, it comes down to how language itself works more than anything.
Yeah, and then most data is like, even if you say like, oh, the taller you are, the better you are at basketball, there are some people who are short and are really good at basketball. It doesn't crash the algorithm, but it makes the prediction harder because you now have this outlier that says something that every other data point doesn't say, essentially. And it's the same is true with the homework example.
Okay,
that
so it's more a matter.
Yeah,
it's a matter of statistics.
Yes, it's a matter of statistics.
Yeah,
and
so if you get like an extreme outlier, it's not going to change everything.
No, we have a lot of points, and that's something you always need with language data. You need a lot of data points to make something meaningful happen. And even then, the predictive accuracies, they vary quite a bit.
Right. So now, I wonder if you can speak on this. When it comes to doom scrolling or just scrolling endlessly, or even for 30 minutes or however long on a platform, what does that do to a brain? Because the basic science is just, oh, that releases dopamine constantly. But what would that actually do to a person, right? Because, when you think about a person and the technology that is the brain, we're working on the same piece of technology that we worked with for thousands of years. Again, the brain, which is used to maybe seeing one thing that's really exciting every couple of years. And then we're getting 30 potentially like the most exciting or funny or interesting things of all time and all of human history, just all at once within a couple of minutes. So what is that exactly doing?
So there's, again, as in most situations, oh, you're gone. Oh yeah, they're back.
No, I just have to charge. I just have to charge my computer. That's all.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
So there's one happening is habituation, that you get used to the things that you're seeing. So you're not going to stay the same level of excited if you see the same type of content for the entire time. Like if you see 5 kitty videos after another, you're like, okay, I've seen cats now, and it needs something more that will excite you in that situation. But at the same time, you still pick up the emotion of what you're witnessing. Like if you only see negative stuff, you're going to feel a little bit more negative. So these are the two like things that influence the way you feel, but it also influences the way you think in the way we talked about earlier. It shapes the way you think about the world, because you like now aggregate this information as this is representative, or at least it's a part of how reality looks like. And obviously it will change then the way your norm, like your perception of normativity changes. Like if you now ask someone in the moment, like, how much does the other political party dislike me? You will extremely overestimate how much they dislike you, because you only see the extremes on the internet. And that's what I mean, but it shapes the way you think about the world. And on an emotional level, as I said, first you get overstimulated, you habituate to the content, and it needs more for you to stay excited. But at the same time, like, how you're not going to stay a long time on social media and like scroll for like 50 minutes straight. That's usually not what you do. It's just, it would overwhelm you a little bit. And that's also one of the reasons why TikTok videos are extremely short and have like all these kind of attention grabbing things. It always needs to have a GTA video on the bottom and some random way too loud noise as well. As like, it really tries to keep you engaged, and it needs these extreme auditive and like visual stimuli to keep you on the platform for like longer than you usually would.
Right.
And if it's this what it takes for you to stay engaged, that's something that needs to be seen in the future, like how people who like grew up with this overstimulation can focus. Because if you used to like watch these intense videos, like, can you even watch something regular for longer than 15 seconds? That's something that remains to be seen.
I feel that way sometimes. Sometimes I watch a movie and it's like, it's not as
Not
interesting.
intense enough, yeah.
Yeah. So going to the final part to the interview, what's just some advice, the best advice you could give to people on social media of how to stay healthy, how to stay well, how to use it properly?
That is a very good point. I think one, just to like put this into perspective, I thought your podcast was already like the way you ask the question is the right way you need to approach social media. There's a lot of like this lay person's belief that social media might be bad, and there's a lot to hate about social media, that's for sure. And the people know a lot about social media, like echo chambers, all this vocabulary that scientists have been using, people also start to pick up. And it's good that they do, and it's good that people engage with what we found. But I think to really make the best of social media is to actually keep it social and keep engaged. Don't stick only to like, there's something good and bad about every platform. If you imagine you only hang out with Snapchat and the edgy people, and this becomes your new reality, it's obviously, that's not a good representation of how a person should be. Also, like, if you only hang out on Instagram and you see all this positivity, where's the balance in that? It's just like, use social media to learn about your friends and use it to be social. Like, use it to meet up with people in real life, stay in touch, keep it real a little bit. Like, if you, like, even if I post something cool with my friends, I would still like follow up on WhatsApp and like be like, oh, this happened to me. Is like, get the social support if you need to. It's like, use it to your advantage. Every page, like Snapchat has its advantages for it not being able to like save messages. If Instagram has its advantage that you can post images that are super positive. On Twitter, you can vent a little bit. On Facebook, you can keep in touch with your aunt if you need to. It's like, just like, use them to your best interest and not just like doom scroll and like reflect on your own consumption. It's like, do you feel better after using it or not? And if you're not feeling better, then change something about it. That's kind of a good point.
Right. Not to sound facetious, but more or less use the social media platforms for what they were designed for.
Yeah, yes and no. You need to think about who designed them. They're not designed for your best interest. They're designed for the company's best revenue. But it does, like, having everyone that you know on the tip of your fingers at all time. That is a massive technological advantage that you have over like people back in the day. Like you can, like, I live abroad for the in the last 7 years, and I can talk to my parents every day. They know exactly what I'm doing. It's great. Like I couldn't have done this like even like 15 years ago. Like use the technology that you have to better yourself. The same will happen with the large language models that we didn't get to talk about. But there's like they are also a massive way of you being able to improve. Obviously, you can tell it to, write my homework. This is the task, and now that you get like a picture perfect like little essay. But you can also use these large language models to actually learn how to write a good essay. Just like use the technology and not be lazy about it. But obviously, everyone likes to be lazy every now and again.
We have some time. You can talk about the large language models.
So yeah, I think that's like a whole different, but like it's an entire new field that is now emerging, and it will impact our lives potentially even more than social media did. And taking what we've now learned and what we discussed in our conversation with about the social media, we also need to keep in mind when it now comes to large language models. We can use them to our best interest and to develop into like people that we couldn't have been 3 years ago. It's like, especially just imagine like a foreigner being able to like write a better essay now, like as a scientist. Like there's just opportunities that you have now that you never had. But it also allows people to be excessively lazy, and also allows a bunch of scam and more fake information and more fake content than there's ever been on social media. Like just imagine like all the pictures. Have you seen the cool Pope picture? The one with the Pope in the club with like a puffer jacket? And
I've
like,
seen that one. I think that's AI generated, but yeah.
There's AI generated. But
I've heard.
now, like on top of the content that is already fake by just renting a Lamborghini for the weekend, you don't even need to rent a Lamborghini anymore. You can just fake the pictures from the get-go. And like there's a similar risk, but even more amplified now with the emergence of the larger models, including generative images and text. So yeah, we are facing a wild future, and that's the task now that we are facing here at the human-centered AI here at Stanford, to like make sure that the positives overweigh the negatives and find out what the good and the bad sides are. But even the end users, you don't need to be at a university to figure out what is good or bad for you. Just like reflect on how you feel after interacting with it or not. Yeah.
With regards to more of the research on AI and ChatGPT, so what exactly, and this is also with regards to laziness, because at my school, as you can imagine, the teachers have this enormous issue where all of a sudden everybody is just generating their homework, right? And they got to such a point where they had to make new policy saying, we have detectors. If you use it, you're getting a 0. It's effectively plagiarism, right? So would you consider ChatGPT just a tool, or like how is it should it be seen as a good tool for legitimate research, or is it just a toy to play with?
So this has multiple layers now. On an education level, obviously people will use this for their homework, etc., and it can make people this. But it's like, just think about when the calculators came out. Like in the beginning, there was a huge uproar. It's like, you won't be having a calculator at all times. And it's like, yes, I do. I always have a calculator around. It's like, it will enable us to be better than we ever have been on an objective standpoint. But as something that you need to consider as a student is that you're going to be rated not on an objective level, you will be rated on a relative level. Like, are you better than other people? Like, if everyone writes their homework with ChatGPT, you're not going to be hired for being average. You need to learn how to use large language models to become better than the other people. And that's an art as well. Like, there's people who can co-work with language models to become like to create content that is even better than like if you just like say, oh, write an essay on this, period. And then you get a random essay on that. But if you are smart the way you like interact with it and you put in your own thoughts and it's a back and forth between you and the language model and you develop something, you still put in a lot of like mental effort and you understand, in ideal case, you understand the content that you talk about. And you're able to create something despite the fact that you use language models. You created something that is visibly better than what other people created. There's still some merit in that, but like there's people who disagree with me on that for sure, and I definitely understand that. And we need to make sure that at least you learn a certain level of being able to write. Like it can't be that you like suddenly you need to write like a quick email and you don't have internet and you're suddenly not able to like compose like a simple text. But if it comes to like these like really higher level, elaborate content, like it has, in my opinion, it would be foolish not to use it. In my opinion, it's like, why wouldn't you use ChatGPT to read over your emails, for example? Like there's no benefit in writing a mediocre or like half-assed email. Just like if you fix it with ChatGPT in a matter of seconds, everyone benefits from it. The reader, the writer. I don't see how this is an issue, but in the educational setting, there's definitely points to be made that you still need to learn how to do certain things. But I'm a bit opinionated. I'm always a bit more on the pro side of using it.
So it's interesting that you bring it up about averages with regards to AI. There's a bit of a theory that AI has possibly gotten dumber because of people, specifically ChatGPT, right? Where it's a theory that people have essentially made it dumber because so many people are trying to play with it or break it or teach it things that aren't necessarily right. You know, like I remember I saw one meme that kind of went viral where the guy gaslit ChatGPT and he goes, he asks, what is 2 + 2 equal? And he goes 4. And he goes, no, it's 5. And then he asks it again and it's like 4. And he goes, no, it's 5. And he keeps doing it until it goes 2 + 2 = 5. So that's like an extreme, that's like the top tier, like prime example making AI dumber. But also that AI is not necessarily the most intelligent thing, but actually instead the most average thing, right? And it's just the average person, the most like abundant collection of average, like it's the ultimate average of texts that you could possibly imagine, which culminates in not being that intelligent, or at least not as intelligent as the media purports it to be. Can you talk on either of those?
I'm like not involved in like the development of these large language models, but I'm sure they are more aware of all of these issues, and they're probably even aware of issues that we are not aware of. And I'm sure they have like smart ideas of how to circumvent that. But also like parts of it is not only what people put in, but there's also like a whole rating system in the back of like, do people agree that something is a good text or not, or is something helpful? And people say yes or say no. So it's not just the average. So if you use like GPT plus and you see like a good GPT-4 model, it creates something that is, like if you like, they have done these benchmarks on BARD, on like the law exam and also on the medical exams. It is now better than the average student in doing that. And I think they will continue on improving the objective performance. So I don't think that this is going to be the biggest concern. So
I'm guilty of this because I'm one of those people who loves to break AI. So, I've sat there. I'm going to admit, I sat there for an hour just playing with it, trying to see how far I could possibly break it. And, in a good way, just for experimental purposes. I've never, done anything.
No, I'm not judging you. All good.
Yeah, everybody has. So one of, the obvious limits that it has is the rule book of, oh, I'm sorry, I can't say that because of whatever reason. So there's prompts that I have tried, admittedly, right, which is probably against the terms of service of OpenAI. But no, it is. I think I've actually read that it is, but that allow you to basically use the AI to its theoretical fullest potential, where it can access developer mode, which is no longer available, which basically removes that whole sheath of I'm an AI and I can't do this. What are your thoughts on something like that?
I've recently seen this presentation here at Stanford where they invited the policymakers and they talked about specifically the guardrails. And it's good that they're in place. And OpenAI, despite the fact that they called OpenAI, they don't have open source material. So other people can't just take their model and remove the guardrails. That's not how it's going to work. There's still ways to break it, but they've gotten much better, and they're still working excessively on, they have people who full-time try to break and improve the model. So I think in the future we will see much less of it. Yeah, I think that's mostly part of my comments. It's fun for now that you can still do it here and there, but I don't think this is something that will persist in the future.
I'd kind of have to disagree with you on that one because, we still see computer hacks.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're possibly right. I shouldn't underestimate the ingenuity of people, and they're really good at that. But I think the larger, the commercially larger, a software is, the more resources obviously go into that. And I think OpenAI has a huge interest to try to reduce that risk. So it's not going to be as easy as it was, but it's possibly still able to do it.
Right. I mean, OpenAI is effectively the biggest AI company out there right now. So, more or less, I would hope that they know what they're doing more than
one would hope.
Yeah, one would hope. But, I mean, they do have hundreds of scientists working on it. Most people don't know that it was founded by Elon Musk either, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with the entire founding story, but there's I've heard one of the someone from OpenAI was presenting here, and they have a very good clue on I mean they've dealt with the questions that we only now get to see for a longer time. They knew what was coming and the possibilities of it. So I hope that they're still a step ahead of the issues that might arise. But it's obviously important because the same happened with social media. Obviously, they still to this point know more than the scientists do about certain things because they have more access to more data than we do, and they have more access to more data. But it's important that they're going to be kept in check by us, for example, research how this influences the well-being or other consequences. It's always important to have not only banking on the institution that developed it to make sure that it's safe. There needs to be more to that, as always.
Right. Comparatively speaking, are any other AI companies, do you think that some are, generally speaking, better AIs than others? Because you always see those videos of Bard AI versus ChatGPT. What's better for what? If you were to recommend me use this for that, or if you were to say overall one is better, what would you say?
Oh, that's a tough topic. I think there's some meta-analysis on where they compared across different fields, and there's also specialized models for certain applications like law documents, medical documents. There's a language model for everything essentially, and it's going to remain a little bit of a rat race of sometimes this is better, sometimes this is better. So it's I don't think I can make a qualified advice on saying, oh, this is definitely going to be the better one. That might change with the next update because they're still doing this every now and again. Sorry, it's a boring answer, but that's what it is.
No, it's not boring. No, if it was boring, I would have left an hour and a half ago. But no. But Yeah, I mean, that's really all I have to say. Is there any final closing thoughts you have on any of this?
No, but I think especially if people, it's a good that you do this kind of videos, but it's also be good if there's an audience who watches that. Everyone who's engaging with that content is going to have a step ahead for their own sake, right? Like they can help themselves feeling better. And even if not every, like, science changes, the perspective on things changes. Even if things that I've said might change, thinking about it and reflecting on it from your own perspective, even that is the best advice that you can have, right? Like even science is like based on like the average, for the average user, this and this is true. It might not always be true for you personally, so just keep an eye on yourself and make sure that you're safe. That's I think the takeaway message.
I think that's fair. I'm going to stop recording. We could talk a little bit after the show, but I really appreciate you coming on, Doctor.
Thanks.